Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session titled Introduction to Effective Altruism with Bella Forristal. I'm Valerie Pang, and I'll be the MC for this session. In this session, Bella will be giving a primer on some of the core ideals of effective altruism, what they mean in practice, and the tools we use to do that. Following Bella's presentation, we'll move on to a live Q&A session where Bella will respond to your questions. You can submit questions through the shortcut live discussion feature. Then, after 45 minutes, we'll bring the session to an end. Let me now introduce our speaker for the session. Bella is the head of marketing at 80,000 Hours, a nonprofit that aims to help people find careers that do more good in the world. She previously co-founded EA Meta startup, Global Challenges Project. She was a group leader for Effective Altruism Oxford, and she graduated from Oxford with a degree in classics with a focus in philosophy. She's interested in animal advocacy, research into altruistic interventions, and moral philosophy. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Bella to give her presentation.
Hello, thank you so much, Valerie. And thank you so much to everyone for coming and listening to me do this little talk about effective altruism. What's it all about? I'm just yes, super excited to be here. I guess this is going to be a fairly introductory talk to what the core ideas are, as Valerie said. I have done this talk over 20 times, it turns out. I wrote it back in 2021, but I haven't done it for a couple of years. So we'll see how we go here. I did do some updates specifically for today. And there'll be some time for questions. So anything that seems unclear, please do feel free to submit it on Swapcard, as Valerie said. So I'd like to start out with a thought experiment. Okay, so imagine for a moment that you are a god, or that somehow you've been granted godlike powers. Now, in this imaginary universe, you can start from scratch. The world hasn't been made yet, and all the infinite possibilities of how it could be made stretch out before you. What would you create? You could create a world that was amazingly beautiful, highly developed with sci-fi levels of technology. And in your world, you could eliminate all pain and suffering and injustice. You could create a universe where no child goes hungry, nobody dies alone or in pain, and nobody is oppressed or oppresses others in their turn. What I mean to say is we can imagine a perfect utopia if we like. And then when I say utopia, I just mean a world that is as good as it can possibly be according to whatever it is that you value. Now think about the real world. How is it different? So we in fact don't live in this perfect utopia. In our world, there is pain and needless suffering and injustice. Now, once again, if you had godlike powers, you might be able to do quite a lot to end this suffering and injustice in the real world, making it more like that utopia that you imagined. But obviously, you don't have godlike powers. You can't do anything to even approach that level of influence. Okay, sure, but you do have some influence, right? All of us have some resources, whether that's your money or your time or your voice. And you could decide to use those resources to move the needle a little bit, just some tiny fraction towards that beautiful world that we would all imagine. Okay, so the important thing that I wanted to draw out from this thought experiment is that if you scale down your power to something more reasonable, something more human, it doesn't really change what you want to do. If you were all powerful, you'd kind of want to push this needle all the way to the right. You wouldn't be satisfied and leave it where it is or only push it a little bit of the way. So yeah, when we scale down our powers, our attitude shouldn't change. We're only able to make some relatively modest progress towards the perfect world that we might imagine, but that doesn't mean that we can't push that needle as far as we possibly can with this limited power that we have. And in fact, if we're ambitious and strategic about how we do it, we might be able to have much more influence than you might first think. Doing the best that we can with our limited resources is the core goal of a community called Effective Altruism. We believe that the world can be better than it is, and we're determined to do what we can to make that happen. Okay, so in the talk, there's going to be 4 parts. First, I'm going to tell you what I think effective altruism is and why I think it matters. Then I want to talk about it not just as an idea, but as a kind of practical project, some of the stuff that you'll be engaged in the conference over the next couple of days. And then finally, I want to tell you what the project looks like in practice today, because I want to tell you about actions, not just ideas as well. And then at the end, we'll move to a Q&A. Okay, so effective altruism, or EA, which I'm going to say for probably the rest of the talk, is about helping us figure out how to do the most good we can. So we're interested in asking this important question, how do we do the most good? And then taking action based on what we find out. Important note that some people misunderstand, EA is not one organization. It's a community of lots of different people and lots of different organizations. Don't think Greenpeace, think environmentalism. Okay, so here's the basic idea behind EA, why I think it matters. So when we look at the world, we see a lot of people in situations of suffering, situations of injustice. There's loads of terrible things going on all around us, and I don't need to give examples for you to already be thinking of one or perhaps a few. Now, whether it's because we empathize with those who suffer, or maybe we have a sense of duty towards them, or maybe a feeling of compassion for our fellow beings, we often have this strong drive to help relieve their suffering. What I mean to say is we all want to help. So given that we would all like the world to be better, we need to do something to try and make the world better. And there are just millions of different ways that you could go about doing this, right? So I might try and help out by volunteering at a soup kitchen, or by giving some money to a charity that makes renewable energy, or by smiling at everyone that I meet on the street, or by adopting a rescue dog, or by running a fundraiser for a charity that helps cure cancer, or, the list could go on. So how do we pick what to do? How do you pick what to do? And when it comes to doing good, effective altruists give the answer, which of my available options allows me to do the most good? Now, it turns out that when we ask this question, that is, when we look at all the things that we could do in the world and think carefully and strategically about it, we can find some things we can do that are surprisingly powerful. In fact, EAs have found that you can radically increase the positive impact that you can have by choosing carefully how you go about doing good. And I'm not talking about having 10% more impact here either, or even 20% or 50%. But it turns out that there are things that we can do which are tens, hundreds, or even thousands of times as much good as the average option. At least that's what I think. Okay, so that's a bold claim. So to tell you more about what I mean, normally here I would do the story of two people. To save a little bit of time, I'm just going to talk about Greg, who's my second person here. Sorry about that if you were looking forward to Angela's story another time. Okay, so Greg Lewis is a doctor, was a doctor. He grew up, okay, I'm going to start at the beginning. He grew up in the UK. He decided he wanted to be a doctor when he was 14 years old. So I'm quoting him here, is the thought that he had when he was a kid. I'm good at science and want to do good. Doctors are good at science and they want to do good. Therefore, I want to be a doctor. Great story, right? Okay, so he dedicated himself to this plan. He studied hard. He applied for medical school, and then he went through 6 years of training and became a doctor. Now, over those years, he became less and less certain that being a doctor was really the right choice. So he recalls a conversation with another doctor who worked in pediatrics, and the doctor said, I don't ever feel like I'm saving lives or making a big difference, because although I might be the guy administering the life-saving treatments, if I went here, they would have just called the doctor down the hall and he would have done exactly the same as I. Now, Greg found this really troubling as a thought, and so he decided to look into it. How much good does a doctor actually do? So to his surprise, there wasn't any existing research here on this topic, so he set out himself. And the outcomes of his research are published on the website 80,000hours.org. You can search how many lives does a doctor save on our site and read it all for yourself. But to summarize, in a country like the UK, which has many talented and hardworking people who are doctors, becoming a doctor might not actually make that much of a positive difference. So there's two main reasons for this that I want to highlight now. First, diminishing marginal returns. So on the slide here, DALYs is a measure of health outcomes. This is how many DALYs are averted by each additional doctor. And as you can see, it just goes down a lot the more doctors you have in a country. The first few thousand doctors in a population will work on the very most pressing issues. But by the 100,000th doctor you add, most of those issues will already have been covered. And then the second reason why the impact was not as high as you might have imagined is replaceability. If you don't apply to medical school, typically somebody else will take your place. So overall, his research suggested that becoming a doctor will, across your career, save about 6 lives compared to the scenario where you never became a doctor. Now, saving 6 lives is incredibly awesome and a very important thing to have done with your career. And it is, yeah. But Greg was ambitious and he thought, maybe we can do even better than that. So he'd come across this organization called Giving What We Can, which just turned 15 years old, I think yesterday. And it was founded back then by 2 graduates who wanted to find the very most effective opportunities to use charitable donations to help people. So they wanted to encourage people to both give more and give more effectively. Usually they suggested a pledge to give away 10% of your income. That's their 10% pledge. Now, Greg realized when he read the research put out by Giving What We Can and another organization called GiveWell doing similar work on a kind of research side of it, which charities do the most good, that maybe doctors could have an even higher positive impact in the world by using their relatively higher salary than by treating patients. This is because the research showed that if you give to the very most effective charities, you can save a life for somewhere around $5,000. And Greg thought that across his whole career, he could easily give away a lot more than that. So for a while, he resolved that that was all he was going to do, work as a doctor, give money to these amazing charities, and that was how he would fulfill his 14-year-old self's wish to do good. But Greg was ambitious, and he thought, maybe we can do even better than that. So he realized that although his money was going to do a lot of good, actually his time was also a huge resource that he had. If you work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 40 years, then you spend about 80,000 hours at your job. And that's the name of the organization I shouted out by his researchers hosted and where I work. And maybe his medical skill set and knowledge, he thought, could be better used elsewhere. So Greg had this thought that not enough was being done to protect humanity against the possibility of a biological catastrophe, say a large pandemic. Now, to be clear, this was in 2017. So, we might think that he was onto something. And he thought about if there was a large-scale disease outbreak, it could harm not only those of us alive today, but affect the prospects for our children and our children's children and all future generations. So he decided that he could use what he learned to help better understand these threats and what we should do in the case of an emergency or how we should prevent it. This is this field of biosecurity research. And so that's what he's doing today, although he does still donate some of his relatively smaller salary to those same charities that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's what I hope to have illustrated with this story, is that it isn't always obvious how to best use our time and resources to improve the world. And that if we think carefully about it, then we can come up with answers that might look much better than what we would have done otherwise. So these kind of ideas of effective altruism help us to answer the question, what really is the best way that I can help? Now, if we don't ask this question, we might be missing out on our very best opportunities to do good. And so we won't really be fulfilling that deep-rooted desire that we feel to help make the world better for everyone. So that, I think, is the fundamental idea of effective altruism. Thinking carefully and strategically about doing good might allow us to have a much larger positive impact than we would otherwise. The rest is kind of details. That is the core idea, according to me. Okay, so before I move on, I'd like to talk a bit more about one other important idea associated with effective altruism. So throughout his story, Greg thought about working on different cause areas, i.e. different problems in the world. First, directly working in medicine, then working in medicine to donate to global health charities, and then working in biosecurity. But many people often feel already committed to a particular cause, like climate change activism or educational inequality. But people in effective altruism often think that instead of committing to a cause beforehand, we should ask, what cause will I work on that will allow me to do the most good? Now, answering this question would involve taking into account your skills and interests and what you could get skilled and interested in, and as well as how much good you can do by working in that area. So it looks like some causes just have many more high impact opportunities than others, and I'll talk in a bit about how we might figure out which ones. But yeah, this approach is broadly called cause neutrality, and I think it's something that's actually really distinctive about effective altruism versus any other kind of movement of a similar nature. Because people in EA are not already committed to one particular cause, EA ideas help us engage in this process of cause prioritization, of doing the careful thinking and research to figure out which cause we think we should focus on and why. So certainly we can't claim to have all the answers, nobody does, but I think that asking the question is really important because, as I said before, some causes offer us the opportunity to have a much higher positive impact than others. Okay, so all that talk about cause neutrality and cause prioritization was a little bit abstract. So I want to tell you what I really mean by these concepts, talking concretely about the project of doing effective altruism, of using the ideas. So first, I'm going to talk about the tools people in the EA community have used to try and identify the best opportunities to do good. And then I want to give some examples of things that we think are really pressing problems and that might be important areas for people to work in and for you to think about over the next few days. Okay, so here's the first tool that we often use. We think that we'll be better able to help others if we think about problems that affect people who aren't just in our own country. We look for ways that we can help, people or relevant beings no matter where they live. So part of this stems from a commitment to equality. Everyone matters equally. But also from an acknowledgement that people in developing nations are often much worse off than us in rich Western countries. So looking for ways to help people in like worse off positions might help us have an even higher impact with our work. Also, there are some issues that we might work on that affect all of humankind or people and animals across the world. And so these problems might be particularly pressing, as I'll talk about later. Yeah, how much good is done by different efforts to help people? So for some people, I think asking this question doesn't even really make sense conceptually. But I think that it is possible to use evidence and careful reasoning to try and work out where there are opportunities that will have a bigger or smaller impact. So for example, when considering what to do or evaluating what somebody did in retrospect, you can compare in numerical terms how many people were made better off, how many lives are saved, or if they made a difference in how people would rate their level of happiness or life satisfaction. In fact, I think it's kind of surprising how often people don't do this. We might be in a better off position to compare what's the best choice to make when we're like buying a laptop or choosing which phone to buy than when we're thinking about like which charity to donate to or like where should I dedicate my effort if I'm trying to help people. I think part of the reason for this is that it's just actually really hard. Like the pros and cons list is harder to write than it would be for a phone. Because a lot of elements are just really uncertain. But I do think that if we do our best, we can get closer to a good answer than if we didn't try at all. Okay, yeah, this is a tricky one. So I think there are loads of problems in the world, and we just only have so much time, money, and attention that we can dedicate to them. So we have to make choices about which problems we solve and which we focus on. This means conscientiously and honestly choosing what we think is the very best thing to focus on and then focusing on that. Now, on the one hand, this can be pretty empowering, right? It allows us to say that given our situation and given our very limited power and knowledge, we're doing the best that we can by the people that we're trying to help. But the flip side of this is that we have to confront and accept the fact that we aren't working on some problems. There are some people who are suffering and we aren't doing anything to help them. So I think this feels really awful. And looking at doing good like this can be really hard because it constantly reminds us of all the people that we can't help and the people that we leave behind. But I will say that EAs aren't the only ones who face this problem. Everyone, including governments, companies, and charities, all have to make decisions about what they do. So if you don't think strategically about different ways of doing good and use some other method about choosing what to do, you still made a choice. And even if you didn't consciously choose, your actions still left somebody out and still left them to suffer. In fact, even deciding to do nothing at all is still a decision and it still left somebody to suffer. We just can't help everyone at once, unfortunately. And so we can't avoid choosing by pretending that we didn't have to choose. So having to make this choice is not unique to effective altruism, but what I think is unique to effective altruism is that it asks us to face up to our decisions and to be honest and realistic and conscientious about the fact that we're not able to help everyone in need. So all we can do is do the best that we can to do the most good that we can. Okay, and finally, this might be familiar to some of you. This is the SMT framework is a way of figuring out which causes offer great opportunities to do good. It's pretty simple, but it's often surprisingly useful. And it compares problems in the world or causes using 3 criteria. So we can like rate problems on these criteria, and that helps us figure out which problem to work on. So I'm going to quickly go through them now. So firstly, scale. That's how big the problem is, i.e. how much bad does the problem cause in the world, and then how much good can we do by solving it. So it involves thinking about not just how many people are affected, but how bad it is to be affected by the problem. So for example, a problem with a very large scale is global poverty. There's just many billions of people affected by it, and it's very bad to be affected by. And a problem with a small scale is making private jets cheaper and more efficient. So there aren't very many people who struggle with their private jet not being efficient enough. And even if we solved it, it wouldn't really do very much good. Okay, neglectedness is how much work is being done on the problem already. In general, it seems that if there's a lot of time and money already being spent on solving a problem, then adding more effort towards it doesn't help as much as adding some effort towards a problem that almost nobody is working on. The basic reasoning behind this is that people will generally try and work on the easiest parts of a problem first or pick the low-hanging fruit. So an example of a problem that is currently very neglected is improving the welfare of farmed fish. Well, it's gotten a bit less neglected since I wrote this talk in 2021, but still very neglected. And a problem that is currently not neglected is cancer research, because there are already loads and loads of people trying to work on this hard and important problem of trying to cure cancer. Okay, tractability, how easy the problem is to solve. So a problem is more tractable if an extra person working on it could make a lot of progress towards solving it, and it's intractable if even adding many people working on it would not make much progress towards solving it. So an example of a tractable problem is premature death from malaria and other treatable or preventable diseases. An example of an intractable problem is inventing a perpetual motion machine, because as far as we can tell, as much as we've tried, we haven't been able to do it, and adding more people wouldn't help. By and large, if a problem has a large scale, is very neglected, and is very tractable, it seems like we'll do a lot more good working on it than a problem which has a small scale, is not very neglected, or is intractable. So this is a framework which has helped the EA community come up with a lot of our current top priorities, or top guesses at priorities for currently improving the world. All right, drink some water. So over time, people in the EA community have found a few promising causes that we might work on if we want to do the most good. So I'm not going to read this section in a lot of detail, since I think the rest of the conference is going to be all about what people in the community are doing in practice. You'll have some chance to speak to each other and learn more at the various other cause-specific talks that are happening throughout the coming days. But I do want to say some things up front about the general framework of what EAs work on. So firstly, EA itself isn't like about these cause areas. EA is cause neutral, as I said before. But right now, the things that I'm going to talk about look like pretty plausible top priority areas, though, of course, lots of people disagree. In fact, figuring out how and why you might disagree could be really useful for thinking about your own priorities and for helping others, get closer to the truth. So that's all valuable stuff. And then the second thing is that EA is really new in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I guess I said given what we can is 15 years old, but that's not that long. And so these priorities could well be wrong and probably will change over time. Finally, I wanted to note that thinking about some of these things might be kind of troubling because they're pretty horrible. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, as I said, and I won't show images of horrible situations that people might be in. So yeah, so many people in EA work on alleviating the worst effects of global poverty. Here on this slide is a quotation from an MIT survey of 13 of the poorest countries and the terrible situations that people are in. And then here are some organizations that are actively working to try and help the global extreme poor. Yeah, if you want to ask me about them in the Q&A or look them up yourself, you can definitely do that. EAGxVirtual just recently had, which works by just like giving money to people in extreme poverty, just recently had some research come out that suggests that it might be actually much better than we thought because we were underestimating flow-through effects or compounding benefits from people having this money over time. So that's pretty exciting for them. Okay, yeah, and then I guess I'm not going to talk through the Against Malaria Foundation in any detail, but again, you can look them up for yourselves. I think there might be more opportunities to learn about global health later on in the conference. So another big problem that people in EA work on is the problem of farmed animal suffering. So many farmed animals have really terrible lives. Some of the details on the slide. Yeah, why farmed animals and not just like animal welfare more broadly? So I think this is quite an old chart, but a good one from Animal Charity Evaluators, which is a charity that works to evaluate animal charities. And it shows there's just this massive difference between the number of animals who are used and killed for food versus the amount of funding that these animals get. So that's the kind of the dark blue square in the left-hand side compared to the dark blue square in the right-hand side. It's just like an incredible disconnect between where most animals are and where most attention and funding goes. That's the neglectedness criterion in action. Okay. So here are some kind of promising organizations working in the area. I already mentioned Animal Charity Evaluators. Oh no, they've updated their logo. Sorry, guys. They have a new logo. It's beautiful. And yeah, some others that you can look at or ask me about in the Q&A. Yeah, so the example, one example to highlight is the Fish Welfare Initiative. I already mentioned that this is a neglected problem, which is getting more attention on it, thankfully. Yeah, I think the Fish Welfare Initiative's work is pretty promising. I'm very excited about it. Yeah, and then the third kind of major category of work, although this one's a little bit more diverse than working on a lot of different individual things than perhaps the first two areas I mentioned, is combating or reducing global catastrophic threats to improve the chance of humanity's survival and flourishing in the long-term future. This one might not be as intuitive, so I'll explain the basic argument. There are some events which could be extremely bad for humankind. So one example that'll be familiar to everybody now is the global pandemic. COVID-19 has caused a lot of suffering across the world, but it's not even close to the worst case scenario, right? We might one day see another infectious disease, perhaps even one which was purposefully created to be really easy to transmit and really deadly. And a disease like this could kill most people or even everyone, cause us to go extinct. And yeah, these are the kind of events which might not only harm all humans alive today, but also all future generations. Yeah, and on the slide is some examples of what people think the most likely potential risks of this kind are. And yeah, I guess there are a lot of organizations now and governments now working to combat them. Yeah, so here's a few on the slide. One to highlight would be maybe the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, focusing on biosecurity and pandemic preparedness, so that if we do have another situation that's as bad as COVID or worse, maybe we're in a better position to respond to it. Okay, and yeah, those are just a few. There are many other cause areas that people in the EA community work on. So yeah, on the slide are some. And I guess I just want to say more generally that, yeah, I didn't want to be listing a kind of definitive list of the priorities, but rather some things that I think we've kind of, people have converged on over the last 15 years or so, and potential avenues for you to explore over the conference. Great. Okay, now let's take a moment to think again about the new utopian world that we imagined at the start of the talk with my thought experiment. So really try and picture it for a second. If you could wave your magic wand, would you make a world without any suffering from poverty and diseases that are cheaply preventable? A world where we didn't need to cage and slaughter animals for our food? A more stable world where we weren't at risk of great suffering or social collapse following outbreaks of disease and war? Now, we obviously don't have magic wands, and we don't have easy solutions. But I do think that there are tools that we can use to help us identify and solve the most important problems facing humankind today. So the framework used by the EA community helps us to aims to help as many people as we possibly can with our limited time and resources. And I've highlighted some tools that we can use to help us do this, such as looking for opportunities to do good everywhere, comparing the effects of interventions using evidence and reason, choosing conscientiously what opportunities to work on, and looking at opportunities to do good through the framework of scale, neglectedness, and tractability to help evaluate which ones are most promising. So for me, using this EA framework is an exciting opportunity to use my power to help improve the lives of others as much as possible. And for all of us, it's an opportunity to fulfill our desire to make the world a better place and to bring our actions in line with our deeply held beliefs. Now, if you, like me, have ever felt sadness, pity, regret, or shame when confronted with the suffering that surrounds you in the world, and you've wished that there's something that you could do to help, then you're not alone. And many in the EA community have felt the same way. But I do think that the opportunities presented by EA also encourage us to feel excitement, determination, drive, and even optimism that there really is something that we can do to help, or certainly we can try. The world may seem increasingly full of problems, but we have some tools at our disposal to help. It turns out that there really are ways that we can help improve the world that are many times better than what we might otherwise choose to do. But we do have to, be willing to be conscientious, careful, and honest about our altruistic efforts to make them the most effective they can be. Okay, there are so many different potential priorities for EAs because there are lots of unanswered questions about what's most important. These questions are really hard, as I've said, and we don't have it all figured out. Now, I say this not to be discouraging, but to make it clear that you shouldn't take what I said as a definitive list, but just to look into what many people in the EA community currently think. So I'd encourage you to reflect on whether you agree and what causes you think are most pressing, and we can talk about it in the Q&A or talk about it with people the rest of the conference. Okay, so I've tried to present you with what I think of as the most important EA ideas. You may want to learn more, then if so, congrats, you're in the right place. There's a whole conference here to help you do that. So I'd like to turn over for the Q&A, so please ask anything that you like. I guess I'd especially like to hear any reactions that you had to the content of the talk, especially where things that I said seemed wrong to you or confusing, or yeah, any other responses at all. Thank you very, very much for your time listening.
Much for your presentation, Bella. So we'll now head over to the Q&A session. A reminder that if you have any questions for Bella, please submit them onto the question section on Swapcard. And so while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll start off with a few questions of my own. So Bella, you gave a great introduction to effective altruism. How can people kind of learn more about effective altruism after this? Like what resources, websites, articles would you recommend them reading after?
Yeah, so I guess I have a couple. I had a couple on my last slide, which you now can't see. Never mind, I will say them out loud. So firstly, you're in the right place if you're here at EAGxVirtual. You can, there are probably loads of people who might have interests similar to yours, or questions similar to yours that you can chat through together and try and figure it all out. But if you want to just like read something, maybe the best place to go would be effectivealtruism.org. I a couple of years ago worked with Benton a tiny bit. Mostly he wrote this introductory essay that I think is just like actually really good. It kind of gets at the core of some of the ideas I think are most important, and so helps explain some of the similar stuff that I was talking about today, but with a different framing. So effectivealtruism.org might be a good place to start. You can also go to 80,000hours.org. So I guess we have this framing. So I work for 80,000 hours, as Valerie said at the start of the talk. We have this framing that is all about kind of what can you do with your career. I guess I think the resources are pretty good. Our kind of most introductory content. Well, we have an essay called Start Here, so you can read that. But then after that, I guess the best thing will be to read the career guide, which is hopefully not too long. You can probably read it in an afternoon if that was your main plan for the afternoon, and aims to take you through some of the whole framework basically for how to apply these ideas to your own career.
Okay. Another question was how can one just start practicing effective altruism in their lives?
I guess that will vary for different people. And I guess there's not like one size fits all solution, because it depends on your answer to the fundamental question at the heart of effective altruism, which is how can we do the most good? I guess one thing that pretty much everybody could do, if you have like a tiny bit of spare cash lying around, is like think about which charities you think like would be most deserving of this cash or something, and then like I think it can be like a really interesting exercise in and of itself, and then also help you learn about your priorities and what's going on in the world, to like think about, okay, like where would I donate this to? That would be like my main recommendation if like somebody wants to do something concrete in the world and is just starting out. But also maybe you're thinking about your own career. And if that's the case, then probably I would say check out 80,000 hours, and there's tons of things to fit, where exactly you are at in your journey.
Okay. Let's go to some of the audience questions. So I'll start off with a question by Sonja. They ask, my initial impression is that the EA community is somewhat self-contained, and most EA-specific organizations mostly refer to each other, which could imply that it limits or slows down its potential for impact. I'm wondering what other global initiatives, networks, or communities EA is most affiliated with, and whether it actively fosters connections.
Yeah, great question. So one thing to say is I agree with your impression entirely if we are talking about organizations that are kind of like doing EA itself or something. So I guess this often gets called like EA meta, or community building is like the genre of the thing. So one of these organizations is the Center for Effective Altruism, who put on this conference today, or supported this conference today. Anyway, who is involved in EAG, and also 80,000 hours is like another like meta organization. And I agree with you that like we tend to do this thing of like being part of EA itself, and like being I guess we try and like have somewhat more of like a broader intellectual circle than like just people who are like EA branded or something. But I do think that we're like that impression matches mine. And then I kind of want to disagree for like lots of the other organizations that like maybe that I flashed up on my slide, like mentioned. I guess I do think that they have a kind of broader intellectual lineage, at least some of them. And then you said, what other communities are there? Now, this is a question that we have struggled with, because we have like if you go to 80,000hours.org/community, we have a page that is all about the EA community. And I guess we wanted to add like recently we wanted to add a bunch to it that was like basically on this question, like what other places can people get involved with? They want things that are not just this like insular, like particular brand of thinking about it. And I think we kind of struggled. So one answer is like professional networks. So like if you work in the field of biosecurity, there'll be like a field of like, there'll be like other biosecurity academics and experts who like want to talk to you about that. And there'll be conferences surrounding that. Similarly for like AI safety, if there's like there's like a ton of interest in the field over the last couple of years due to like the kind of rise in AI capabilities, like these impressive consumer-facing systems. And so like there's loads and loads of conferences that you can go to there and networks and blah, 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 that are all kind of happening. But other than those kind of like professional networks, I don't think I have a great answer. There is this recent thing, the School of Moral Ambition, which I think is aiming to be, and who's the founder of that? I can't remember his name. I'm very sorry, but I think if you Google the School of Moral Ambition, you'll find it. And I think they're trying to do a like just like in following in a similar like direction, like trying to get people interested and like doing a lot of good and like trying to do something ambitious, but with the aim of helping others rather than merely advancing your own interests. Yeah, I think that is like it's like fairly separate from EA, and like although it's like pretty nascent, might actually be a really great other option out there.
Great. Thanks for your answer, Bella. So we'll go on to the next question. And this is by Gabrielle. And they ask, in 80,000 hours, the most pressing world problem is preventing an AI-related catastrophe. How does this fit in the EA framework? It doesn't seem too tractable and far from the most dangerous and pressing problem at the moment. So they're wondering like, how would you think about it?
Yeah, great question. Well, I guess one obvious thing to say is, hey, we wrote a whole page about this. So you said preventing an AI-related catastrophe. That is the headline of the problem profile. If you click on it, you can read the problem profile there. Now, it is, I believe, 13,000 words long. So let me try and do a summary. How does it fit into the framework? Well, firstly, on the scale question, I think that the idea is that if there were to be like either a misaligned artificial intelligence, so an artificial intelligence system that is like very, very powerful and doesn't have the same goals as perhaps its creators or humanity at large, then this could be like, potentially catastrophic. And there's all sorts of arguments for why that might happen or why it might not. Or like powerful AI systems might be like misused by malevolent human actors, like people who want to do horrible things, and then they just have these like really powerful tools to help them do it. The thought is that this is something that could be very large in scale because maybe it could affect like all of humanity. Reason being, they might basically just be able to access like very many resources or like kind of take over like very quickly. And there's a sub article within the problem profile that explains in more detail, like some more concrete detail, what these kind of takeover scenarios might look like. So you can kind of read that. And so that's on the scale side. Maybe it affects everybody currently alive. And then like, if we are kind of wiped out in such a disaster, then that also affects everybody who otherwise would have been born, like all future generations. That's kind of on the scale point. Neglectedness, I guess, in 2022, we estimated that there were 300 people working full-time in the cause of AI safety. This was including like some support staff at organizations and all research staff at organizations, but also only including roles we thought would directly work on AI safety, so not on developing AI systems. So that's not very many people, basically, but like how big a deal it might be. Now, I think since 2022, the number has gone up considerably. We've been trying to get an up-to-date estimate, but it's surprisingly hard. The field is moving very fast, and there's just like a lot more organizations to kind of check now. So kind of like counting them up one by one, which is what we did in 2022, isn't really a viable option anymore. So anyway, I don't know what the number is today, but it's larger than 300, but it's not, I would doubt it's 3,000. That just seems like not that much resources going into it versus kind of like the resources going into building advanced artificial intelligence, which is like tens of billions of dollars. And then on tractability, I guess you said you don't think it's very tractable. I guess I'm unsure. And it seems possible that we just like this is an entirely like there are people who think like there's just no way we can ever solve this or be sure that we have like this is either inevitable or like it's pointless because like either it's like gonna happen, like we're gonna have a huge catastrophe from artificial intelligence and there's nothing we can do about it, or like it'll never happen because this is in principle impossible or something. Okay, these are perspectives people have. I guess my perspective is it seems like there are some things that we can do that like meaningfully reduce risk. So like, for example, I'm quite excited about like some recent like initiatives to get like policy and regulation governing what these AI companies can and can't do, or what they have to do before they're sure that their models are safe to release to the public. Yeah, I guess I could say more, but I'll cut it off there, and you can read more about it on our site if you're interested.
Great. You had a very detailed answer, Bella. And yeah,
Yeah.
people can go on to EAGK hours to read up more about this topic. So, the next question we have, and this is from Ahmed, is how does religion feature into this? And by this, I think he means EA.
Yeah. I guess so. I'm not religious myself, which is the first caveat I'll say. So maybe it'll be interesting to talk to people who are. One thing is I think there's not like an explicit place of like, and here's where we think about how like yeah, like how we interface with that in like the kind of frameworks that I was discussing. But I will say there are a bunch of religious EAs, and I think they have lots of very interesting and cool things to say about how they feel about their religion, and how it affects their like desire to help others, whether that's like trying to like be compassionate because that's like something that they like they're like their moral code and like their community's ideals and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, there's an EA for Christians group. There is Jewish effective giving. Is there an EA for Jews group? I'm not actually sure. I think there was at some point, but maybe it's inactive. But yeah, EA for Christians is definitely active. And then I'm not sure if there are groups for other religions. There might be. You can try Googling around. Certainly looking on the EA forum might be a good place to go. And yeah, and basically I recommend talking to those people. Yeah, Jonathan from EA for Christians is really great. I don't know if he's at EAGxVirtual, but yeah.
Okay. We are almost at time, but maybe just to wrap up, maybe what kind of advice or closing thoughts do you have for whoever's watching your talk?
Sure. Well, I guess if you came to this talk, probably you're like at EAGxVirtual because you're like excited about these ideas, but maybe didn't know as much about them coming in. And so I guess I just want to say like, I'm so excited for you. Like, I feel like you have a real journey of like discovery and like learning ahead of you. If you like decide that it seems like the kind of thing you want to learn more about. Yeah, I have over the last few years like found this community to be like a place where I find some of the most like amazing people in the world. It's just like and I just like really have really appreciated the opportunity to, as I said, like act on this this core value that I have of like trying to really actually help. And it just like, yeah, it means a lot to me. So yeah. That was a bit of a weird closing thought. I hope that you have fun at the conference. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really inspiring. I think everyone got away a really good understanding of at least an introduction of EA. And so yeah, with that, we have reached the time for our session today. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks so much.